Who operates Pure Power Marine. He specializes in installations, and he's familiar with most of the major brands that are out there now, and the different transducers and all the other apparatuses that have been on the market lately. And he's got a good broad familiarity. And then we have Jason Neglia, who's joined us from the Toronto area. Jason is very familiar with a lot of Garmin's products. So we're going to kind of give each individual here, a little bit of time just to kind of share. Jason's going to share on, what some of the new stuff that Garmin has out currently and how it works, and Joe will probably then focus on a little bit of Humminbird and Lowrance, and maybe also a little bit of Garmin too, and just how that all works. Shane's got some good strategies for waypoint management as well. He might touch on a couple things for on the trolling side of things for our electronics. And after that, we're pretty much just going to open the floor up, because we know that there's a lot of questions out there. Anything from how stuff is installed to how things work and what things do, or how can things work better. So we want to make sure that everybody comes out of here as best informed and as possible. So hopefully that'll work. So I think we'll get started. I'm going to have Jason kind of start us off first. Jason's going to kind of share what's some of the stuff that Garmin has going on. Jason, fishes a lot of Lake Ontario, so he'll touch on how it's used in a Great Lakes trolling way, and then I'm sure he can also touch on some of the other stuff too.
All right, well, I'll start with saying thanks for you guys for coming out tonight. Appreciate all you being here and coming in to listen to us speak on what we have. So a little bit of my history is I'm just a Garmin ProStaff. I'm a rec guy like you guys, most of you guys in this room. I don't work for Garmin. I just ProStaff for them. Fish a lot of tournaments on Lake Ontario. 99.9% salmon fishing. That's what I do. I don't do any walleye stuff. I don't do any of that. It's strictly salmon on Lake Ontario. My boat is set up in Port Credit, so most of my fishing is done out of the Port Credit area, and let's say going east towards Toronto. I was a Lowrance guy for my entire life. Probably about 20 years of my fishing career, if you want to call it that, was Lowrance. And in about 2017, I purchased a new boat. And when I brought that boat up from South Carolina, it had some Garmin electronics on it. Some dated Garmin electronics, but it had Garmin electronics. So at that point, I wasn't sure which direction I was going to go with electronics. So started doing some research on Garmin and had heard about the Panoptics that had just been released in 2015. And it was still relatively new. It was predominantly used in the bass world, and a lot of the jigging guys and stuff like that were using it. And there was almost no information on it from a trolling standpoint. So as I did some research, I came across some guys that were fishing out in the Baltic Sea. And they were the first trolling angle I had seen someone using a live score. At that time it was Panoptics, I should say, which is a PS30. That is the transducer I'll first start talking on. So that's kind of the Gen 1, let's call it, of live imaging for Garmin, Panoptics PS30. So it's a transom mount transducer, and what it allows you to see is a 60 by 120 beam. So a much wider than narrower beam. So the way it was mounted was, the transducer kind of looks exactly like my cell phone. It's actually quite large. It's about 6 inches across and 4 inches wide. And what it did is it gave you a really wide angle off to the sides, but not as much depth, let's call it front to back. So I ended up purchasing one, and the first season I used it in that orientation, and it was amazing what I learned in the first year. What you could actually see with live imaging completely changed the way I fish and the knowledge I got from it. It was an incredible tool, just a wealth of knowledge to completely learn how fish reacted now to your boat and how fish actually came into your spread. as trollers, I'm sure most of us, kind of had the ideology that, salmon or walleye or whatever you're trolling for kind of came in from behind the boat, right? It started tracking your baits and followed and followed. But when I installed the Panoptics, what I learned was the amount of fish that actually come from the front of the boat, or amount of fish that actually come from the front and do a hard 180 on your spread, rather than those fish that just kind of, we called them phantom fish, that kind of just came from the back of the boat. It was incredible to see how these fish reacted. So after 1 year of using it and seeing what they did, I just thought that what I was seeing out to the sides was cool, but as a troller, our downriggers for the most part kind of tell us a lot to what's going on, especially first thing in the morning and as the day started. So I had this crazy idea that maybe I could flip this transducer, and instead of seeing that width out to the sides, I could see that width front to back. So I had a bracket made, and I essentially spun it around. So I was fishing it now in a forward I call it the hacked version. What we were seeing now was that 120 front to back rather than out to the sides. So what that was allowing us to see now was perfectly our downriggers, to the point where you could even see your flashers rotating and see the fish come into the spread, right to your spread, even to the point where I was learning how the fish, especially in the mornings and even later in the day, you'd be absolutely amazed from your traditional sonar in 2D, where we thought fish were tracking our baits. When you see that, that track on your screen, 9 times out of 10, those fish are literally attached to your downrigger balls. They're tracking your downrigger balls. They're not even paying attention to your baits that are, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 feet back, depends on how long of a tail you're using off your downrigger. So these fish would literally come in off the side or from the back, and like laser beams, they just come into your downrigger ball, and they would just hang at your downrigger ball and just be mesmerized by the downrigger ball and just track it and track it and track it. And you'd see that on Panoptics clearly, because you have that separation where I could see my downrigger ball, and then 20 feet behind it I could see my flasher, rotator, spoon, whatever your presentation be. So it was amazing to see how they would react to that, where on my traditional screen at the front, all you saw was this tracker. And for a lot of times, with our 2D, we watch it, there's a fish on our bait, there's a fish on our bait, let's watch it. When that fish is literally on your downrigger, it has nothing to do with your bait, it's not even near your bait. And a lot of those fish would just literally, a lot of times, just turn off and roll off to the sides and not even come back to your baits, right? So it gave us so much information from that standpoint, to like where literally on cue at times, when, especially first thing when those fish would come in hard, we would literally see that, pull our riggers up, and sometimes and this is something I never did. My background was kind of a little bit of river fishing and fly fishing, so I was more of a finesse guy when it comes to a lake standpoint. So I was always under the ideology of long leads, everything away from the boat. The boat, the fish are scared of the boat, whatever. So we would literally at times pull that rigger up, and I would literally clip my flasher, like I'm talking sometimes a foot and a half off the ball, and send it back down. That, as soon as it went down, the next fish that came in, it was almost instant that fish was locked, because it would come into that downrigger ball, and now my presentation was right there, right in front of them, rather than being 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 feet back. That's just in some cases, but it showed me that information as to what they were doing. And it was phenomenal. By changing it that way, again, now I was able to see, almost, I'd say, depends on your depth perception and how deep you are over certain depths, but as you got deeper, like I'd say probably in about 100 feet of water, I was seeing almost 100 plus feet in front of the boat and 100 plus feet behind the boat. So you're getting to see you're seeing fish coming in from the front, you're seeing what's happening in your spread. And again, as long as your spread was kind of pulled into that scope, you could literally see your flasher rotating. And that was the difference too in perception. When we had it the traditional way, what would happen was you'd get a good angle of perception from depth angle, where you kind of lose it when it's front to back. But what would happen was if you had it running in this position, you'd have your downrigger balls right here, right? So how it works is, I don't have any images that I could show you guys, but how Panoptics works is it's live imaging, but it comes up in a 2D format. So it almost looks like a heat-seeking blob. I don't know if any of you guys have watched videos online. So, your traditional arc that we're used to seeing on your screen, which just has that hook, as we call it, is no longer. It's a moving blob is what we call it on the screen, and you're seeing that come in real time. So like there's almost no delay. They say in the first generation it was maybe around 2 seconds, where some of your traditional stuff, some of your 2D stuff could ping up like upwards of 20 seconds. That's how much of a delay. Like there's times on the PS30 where I would see fish come in, so fast into your spread and look over at the front of my 2D and wouldn't even see a mark. You wouldn't even see that fish come in. Zero. Not even a mark, because it comes in so fast to that cone and either buzzes out or happens so quick that the 2D doesn't even pick it up, right? In certain applications, right? So it's a fantastic tool for information. That's what I tell everyone. It's a great tool for information. Some guys that I've, some friends and some guys in the circle that I've got it to, it absolutely drives them crazy because they see it and they watch it, but they're like, it's driving me crazy. I see fish come in, but they're not biting, right? And I try to stress to them that the key to this thing is it's a tool. It's not going to make you catch more fish. It's just how everybody processes the information differently. Right? Some guys are dialed into it and they'll make adjustments. And where that's going to kind of segue into is that's one thing we learned too. Like a lot of days as salmon trollers out there, we'll have a spread in the water and the same thought that, you have one rod that's really, really hot, right? And that rod just keeps firing and it's firing. And, you're picking away all day. Might not be going on all day, but it's a steady pick on this one rod, right? And you have, maybe another rod and maybe 2 divers or something that are out there, and you're, kind of in the back of your head like, hey, those rods aren't going. Maybe we should change something out, right? There's something that's not working. We should change it up. And, a lot of times we'll change a rod, and, for guys that are maybe new to it or not paying attention, that bite will slowly, peter off or it'll just die instantly, right? And we always call that as our, our puller rod or our rod that pulled it in. With live scope, you see that. And there's so many times where, say I had a high rigger, and my low rigger was here, and I'd see a fish come in, that fish would buzz in at 100 miles an hour and just be hooked on my high rigger and be hanging there, and then boom, down that deep rod. And that was the hot rod all day. And 9 times out of 10, most guys would have changed out that high rigger because it wasn't doing nothing for you all morning, right? It wasn't firing, wasn't taking any shots, so you pull it. So you get to actually see that on Panoptics and see what these fish are doing and how they react to certain things. And that was in its first generation. Now, I don't know, tell me if I'm going too long, Mark, or if we're doing fine. We're now into the 3rd generation of live scope was where we're at right now. So when live scope first came out in the 2nd generation, so let's call PS30 Panoptics generation 1, live scope, that was called an LVS 32, that was generation 2. Now we're into generation 3, which is there's an LVS 34, and now there's a new live scope XR, which is an LVS 62. So when live scope first came out, it was 100% designed for your nearshore guys, right? It had a much crisper picture, but it was only designed for depths, let's call it, in quality, probably to about 80 feet. And the range was maybe about the same, give it 120 or so, depends in your aspect back, right? Now that system had to be mounted on a pole, so it was a pole mount system, right? And the difference was, it was a crisper picture, but it was only a 20-degree cone angle, right? Where the PS30 was a 40, so it was much wider, but didn't have the crispness and didn't have the same amount of a raise, essentially, that they, as Garmin calls it. The transmission rate was a different frequency. So live scope was much higher. So you were seeing stuff crisper, faster, and in a broader range within that cone. So when it first came out, I'm like, we're a troller, we're predominantly fishing deeper water. Wasn't, a little too keen on having a pole. I run a bigger fiberglass boat, so I was kind of like, where do I mount this pole? You got to kind of retract it every time you get to your spot. You got to pull it back out of the water when you move. So I was a little like, I don't know, PS30 is working for us. But at the same time, I was intrigued by, what I was able to see in some of the videos we were seeing and some of the guys that were using it for jigging, where like the target separation, as they call it, was so much more broader now. So like on a live scope, your target separation, especially on some of the new stuff, if any of you guys know what target separation means, we could go over a little bit over that too, as well as you could see, like, so on your traditional sonar, when you see sometimes you see a real heavy, thick hook on your screen, a lot of guys will think that's a really, really big fish. Sometimes that could literally be 2 or 3 fish in one image, and that's what's giving you that really dense. So 2D traditionally doesn't have a very broad or a very specific target separation, where live scope, the newer live scope, you're getting it down to, I think they have on the new one, and they're calling it up to about 14 inches. So 14 inches of separation is what it could determine between. So if you have 2 fish 14 inches apart, it will mark both of those fish individually, as to structure as well too. So if you have a fish and then you have structure in behind it, it could separate that as narrow as 14 inches, right? So now you're getting a true picture as to what you're seeing down there, right? So as we kind of went through that second generation and it didn't really cater too much to trollers, in I say about August of 2022, Garmin was going to be releasing their LVS 62, so LiveScope XR. And what this was designed, it was the same thing as the new generation LiveScope Plus, the 34. It was just essentially that transducer on steroids. It was double the size and just had a broader range. So it could see deeper, could see further away, and the rating will actually blow your mind. So if you could imagine on that original PS30, as I told you guys, even once I flipped it, I was kind of seeing 100 feet in front, 100 feet behind, and maybe 30 to 40 feet off the side once I had flipped it. With the new XR, you are now seeing 500 feet in front of the boat or behind the boat, and 500 feet deep in freshwater. So it completely opened everything up. So I was lucky enough to get one of the prototypes in August of 2022, and was kind of like, what the hell do I do with this thing? Where do I mount it on my boat? Because it had to be pole mounted, right? Like I had to now create a system to find it on my boat where I could actually deploy it, set it all up. That was a whole thing in itself. But anyhow, we got it figured out. And the first day we put it in the water, it was like, Panoptics all over again, times 10. To the point where the clarity of LiveScope now being applied to trolling and having the range was incredible. I could see, literally, I'm a big meat guy, so I fish a lot of meat out on Lake Ontario. I could see my flasher, I could see my 3 Twinkies, and then my meathead. That's how precise it was. And that's like, I'm talking like, I've been playing with like, you could run a lead 100 feet back and see that. We were playing around with it at the end of the season as we got more familiar with it, and I was seeing a long line copper with a spoon back almost 400 feet. I could see that spoon doing this out back there. So now what that really gave you is it even opened up a whole new range to like, before we saw fish kind of come into our spread and you weren't sure like, if it came in your downrigger, if it did drop back, if, as later in the day and that tail got a little bit longer on your leads, you were kind of out of that cone. So you'd see that fish come into your downrigger ball, but once it kind of buzzed out, it was kind of out in no man's land, so you weren't seeing that. Now with the LVS 62, the XR, when a fish comes into your spread, if it's on your flasher, your Twinkie, your spoon, your meathead, you could see it to a T. You will almost see every single hit. Like if you have it dialed in correctly and you're seeing that profile on the screen, that fish that comes in, you could call it every time. I could watch that rod, say, there's a fish there, boys, there's a fish there, boys. Look over that rod, just pump it, it's on. You will not miss a fish. That's how precise it is. Like that's the clarity in what you're seeing, right? So it's really changed a lot and revolutionized, the way you're seeing LiveScope and sonar as a whole. 2D still has a place. Like I still run a 2D transducer on the boat because the thing with LiveScope is it only works at trolling speed max. So like once you get up around 3 miles an hour, she's pretty much done. Like you're not gonna see, you're gonna lose your picture quality. So it's truly designed to deploy once you get to your spot, be it if you're casting or jigging or, i.e. trolling, you deploy it and set it up at that point. So when you're running out at speed, you still need your 2D. I still use my 2D for that. I don't want to knock 2D, but on my boat it's essentially become irrelevant from a fishing standpoint, other than when we're running out to our spot and using it for depth or speed over ground or anything like that. But yeah, it's really changed the way I fish and really changed the information that you could pull. Like the amount of information and the tool that it's become that's the biggest part to me. Like a lot of guys get it. I know some guys, I have a lot of guys on my dock that, are from maybe a different generation than I am and, kind of have the blinders, I tell them, and they're old school in a sense. And it's, no, you're just chasing the technology. You just chase all the new stuff and, it is what it is. You don't need all this fancy stuff. And I believe a lot of it, you know what I mean? Like a lot of it is true. You can chase a lot of stuff. But having some of these guys that, essentially could be my fathers and grandfathers, guys that I highly respect and been doing it far longer than I have, come on the boat and see it for the first time and see the reaction on their face. Just the joy that I get out of that is incredible because I haven't had one guy on the boat yet that says, you know what, that's just gimmick, that's just, you're just chasing something. That's not, I don't see the use in this, right? Because again, it's not going to make you catch more fish necessarily, but the way everyone processes information is completely different. But if you're a guy that likes to, is a little more technical and likes to process stuff, live scope is for you. And even if you don't, it's a great fun factor. I sell it to a lot of my charter friends where, even when you have your clients on the boat and, sometimes the fishing's a little bit tougher than other days and, they slap on the live scope and it could go both ways in a sense where at least you see fish coming in and they're like, could explain to a client, like, look, there's fish down there. They might not be positive fish or active fish, but they're there, right? So it also engages the clients and you get to see what's going on. So it's fantastic. And maybe just to come off a little bit on the trolling aspect for some of the guys in here that won't, might not be intrigued in for a trolling aspect, I would say probably 70% or for a Garmin, or a lot of the Bass Pros now have some sort of live, I don't want to say Garmin, but live imagery on their boats. Would you say that's a fair?
I'm going to say if you think you're going to win a tournament in Ontario or anywhere for that matter without a live scope or forward-facing sonar, those fish are probably dirt shallow and it's a 1 in a million. I don't think I haven't cashed a check in 4 years that I haven't fished on forward-facing sonar.
And to the extent where he could, that's his world, but like what the guys are even, it's got to the point where now, even with the two ranges of live scope, so that 34 that I was talking about, which is called the new live scope plus, it's the same transducer, it just doesn't have the range, but it's clearer, crisper in that shallower water or that narrower beam that it produces. So what's happening is a lot of the bass guys are even running that 62 up at the front of their boat and the 34 mid boat or back of the boat, and what they're doing is they'll come into a bay, and because of its range, you could literally pan in and scope a bay and look for structure, look for bait before you even set up. You know what I mean? And they'll be able to scan an entire area, an entire bay, and say, okay, let's see what's going on here. There's some structure, some bait, and then they'll set up, and then they'll deploy their 34 for that cleaner, crisper view, right? So it's incredible what we're doing. A bit of a side angle from that is I don't know who, I'm assuming a lot of guys are trailer bro guys or guys that tow their boats around. But what I've been doing on the side a little bit with this is I've been working with an automation guy who's in the fishing community, doesn't do stuff for fishing, but we've actually developed a fully automatic live scope mount. So essentially designed for anybody, but more catered to the bigger boat guys that don't trailer their boat around and want to have to retract a pole, take it in every time. So we designed essentially a fully automated system that could be mounted on your track, it could be mounted on your transom, and it's a fully electric hydraulic actuator on a wireless control, so very similar to like a trolling motor mount. And we mount that to the back of the boat, and now you could literally get out to your spot, hit a button, retract the transducer on a button, scope it, left, almost 360 it'll do next to near 360, and then on a button, retract it back up and run, so you're not physically, pulling it. So the technology is getting there, for some people, because that was a big thing when the live scope came out. I'm saying from a trolling aspect, especially out on the Great Lakes, a lot of the trolling guys were like, we already got, rod trees and divers and all kinds of stuff that we got going on. All we need is another pole now, and it's happened to me too. You're getting hyped up, you're in a tournament and it's about to move and you forget to bring the live scope up. And you're talking about a $4,000 transducer that you don't want to leave in the water and power up and and look back and your pole's doing a J. So I can't say that hasn't happened, but yeah, so it's phenomenal technology. Like I said, the PS30 still has its place. There's no it still does everything you need and more if it's something from an entry point, because your PS30 is going to run you in around $2,000 for the transducer, and you don't need no fancy pole mount or arm that's extra, and it's still going to give you a lot of that information and do everything you need and more compared to your traditional 2D. Once you get into the live scope, so on and so forth, like I said, kind of the sky's the limit with that. But yeah, it's just it's phenomenal technology. It could be applied to all kinds of fishing now. Like I said, at the beginning, it was kind of a near shore thing. So, you know, if you're a troller, be it walleye or salmon, like for some of the walleye guys, like I don't walleye fish, and I've yet to have it out on Erie or try to get out on some of my friends' boats, because that's another beauty about the system. The pole mounted system is super easy to move. So if you get a track mount system, you literally just got to bring the black box with you and the transducer and the pole, and you could throw it on your buddy's boat. It just needs power. It's relatively easy. Like, you know, you still need to wire it up, you know, very primitive. You could do it, you know, off a battery and run it on a system. But I always thought maybe for Shane or something, like for walleye fishing, because you have that range now of adjusting the pole. That's the biggest thing. Like when we were fishing at PS, like I said, once we got outside that range, you kind of lost what you were seeing. Or even some days on Lake Ontario, we would deal with a lot of heavy currents, right? So sometimes you'll swing your stuff out of your cone angle. With having it on that pole, you're never out. You just constantly adjust. Current swings a little bit left, you swing left. Swings a little bit right, you swing right. So you're always on your baits. And for that matter, even if you're running, you know, 3 lines off to the side, be it divers or planer boards, you could literally 180 that, and you just want to see your divers, you could shoot it at all your divers and hit all 5 divers and see what all 5 divers are doing, right? You don't only have to be looking at your riggers or your long lines, or for that matter, you could even spin it around and look forward. You want to see 500 feet in front of the boat and see what you're coming at? You know what I mean? You could do that too. We use it a lot off the drop, and what we were playing for with this year a lot with is one of my friends, he's a little extreme. He's running 2 of them. So he has one on both sides, 262s, one on either side of the boat. So we'll have one set up off the back, and another one will literally point it up onto the drop. So we could literally see fish that are up on the top of the drop or fish that are riding the shelf just with that one, essentially doing what a lot of the bass guys would do in a bay. We're now scanning off to the side and seeing, you know, 300-400 feet off to the side and see what's over there. And because of that range, you could almost make that adjustment on your troll, right? With the old one, you know, by the time you only saw 100 feet in front of you, by the time you saw fish or a bait ball, by the time you kind of adjusted and turned and, you know, stuff's moving, you kind of burn by it. But if you could see something 400 feet out, you can make those adjustments, you know what I mean? And especially at a walleye speed, you could easily correct, and put the boat over top of that bait ball or that school of fish you're seeing off to the side. So it's just phenomenal technology, and like I said, it's not overwhelming. It may, you know, I'm speaking on it because I'm well adversed at it, and I don't know if it's a lot of it's probably going over top of your heads. It's super user friendly. The whole Garmin interface as a whole is really user-friendly. It could be adapted to pretty much almost, I don't want to say they're entry-level, but they're near entry-level, which is their EcoMap system, which, you know, you could get a 9-inch EcoMaps unit at, you know, a lot of the sale prices or show prices at in and around $1,000, and that Panoptics will adapt to that system. You don't have to have a, you know, a $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000 GPS map system screen to use it, right? So it is, you know, accessible in that standpoint. You know, it is an investment for sure. But if you're someone that likes technology and strives on information and is, you know, and in fishing, I believe, you know what I mean, you know, taking notes and information and seeing what fish are doing and how they're reacting, there's nothing else like it. There's no way your traditional sonar could even compete with it or give you that information. It's impossible, right? So on that, you know what I mean? I'll swing it over to you.